It is said that before the sun fully rises, there is a moment when the river pauses, not frozen, not asleep, only listening. At dawn, the Nile stretches long and unbroken, its surface barely moving, as if holding a secret breath. Mist drifts low above the water, thin as a veil drawn across memory. The light arrives slowly, touching the river without disturbing it, as though even the sun understands that this place must not be rushed. Beneath the silence, the water waits. This was never only a river. Whispers tell us it was a measure, not of distance, but of time itself. Long before marks were carved into stone or numbers learned to speak, the Nile breathed a calendar into being. With each slow rise and retreat, it told the land when to wake, when to labor, when to rest. Without words, without promise, it decided the shape of life. Where memory fades, the river remains. Marked by the moon and guided by stars, its movements were watched with reverence and unease. Along its banks, farmers learned to read what could not be written. They studied the scent of damp wind, the flight of birds at dusk, the way reeds leaned toward or away from the current. The river spoke in signs, never explanations. Each year, the waiting began long before the flood arrived. The soil would crack beneath the sun, dark lines opening like quiet questions. Fields lay still, holding the dust of the last harvest, the echo of effort already spent. And always there was the pause, the long breath between seasons, when nothing could be done except watch the horizon and listen to the water at night. It is said the flood came like a messenger wearing a veil, sometimes generous, spilling wide and deep, covering the land with promise, sometimes restrained, hesitant, leaving the earth thirsty and uncertain. No 2 years were the same, and yet the ritual never changed. At the river's edge, offerings were placed softly, bundles of reed, small bowls of grain, bread shaked by hands that knew exhaustion well. Prayers were not spoken loudly, they were folded into mud, pressed into the current, entrusted to the slow movement of water. The river did not answer, it only continued. This was the agreement, unspoken, ancient, and binding. Farming here was not merely labor, it was alignment, a surrender to rhythm older than memory. Fields were planted not when hands were ready, but when the river allowed it. Stars overhead marked invisible gates in time. Moonlight traced paths across water that no one could follow. The Nile was both giver and thief. When it rose, it erased boundaries. Markers disappeared beneath the flood. Paths dissolved. The land forgot its own shape. Yet when the water receded, it left behind something darker, heavier, soil rich with life, carrying the breath of distant mountains. From loss came nourishment, from uncertainty, survival. Beneath the silence, contradictions gathered like sediment. The river was sacred, yet dangerous, predictable, yet unknowable. Its cycle could be anticipated but never controlled. Farmers lived inside this tension, shaping their lives around something that could not be held. They rose before light, not to command the day, but to meet it. Tools waited where they had always waited. Fields stretched outward, familiar and unforgiving. Hands pressed seed into earth still cool from night, trusting that the river's gift would be enough. And when doubt crept in, as it always did, eyes turned again to the water. Birds lifting from reeds became omens. The thickness of silt clinging to ankles carried meaning. Even silence was read carefully. The river taught patience not by instruction, but by endurance. It is said the gods moved through the Nile's silt, not above it, not apart from it, within it. Their presence was felt in the weight of wet earth, in the way water darkened the soil just enough. Divinity was not distant. It flowed past the fields daily, close enough to touch, yet impossible to keep. The exhaustion of those who worked the land was softened by belief, not comforted, softened. There was solace in knowing that effort alone did not decide fate, that something older, wider breathed alongside them. At night, the river reflected the sky. Stars trembled across its surface, breaking and reforming with each movement. Time itself seemed to loosen there, stretched thin between water and light. The same stars returned each season. The same flood followed its ancient path. Human lives passed quietly between these repetitions. When the flood finally withdrew, it did so without ceremony. Water slipped back into itself, leaving fields changed. Black soil glistened where dry dust once lay. Footprints appeared briefly, then softened, then vanished. The land inhaled what the river had exhaled. This was the moment of both relief and fear. Had the river given enough? Had it taken too much? Answers would not come until much later, for now there was only work, careful, deliberate, wordless. Seeds pressed into fresh earth, rows measured by eye and instinct, trust renewed, not because it was deserved, but because it was necessary. The calendar breathed again. Days followed one another, marked not by numbers, but by growth. Green emerged slowly, fragile and persistent. The river watched from its banks, quiet once more, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. And perhaps to the river nothing had. When dusk returned, the fields emptied, tools rested, the land cooled. The Nile continued its endless movement, carrying fragments of prayers, memories, and silt toward places unseen. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood. Perhaps the river was not a guide, but a mirror, reflecting humanity's willingness to wait, to trust, to surrender control. Its silence was not absence, but depth. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Long after the last harvest was gathered, long after footprints faded from the banks, the river kept breathing. Its rhythm outlived names, borders, and stone. It flowed through forgetting and remembrance alike. Where memory fades, it remains. And even now, beneath the silence of night, it moves, measuring time not in years, but in breaths, carrying with it the quiet truth that life was never lived by command, only by listening. Under a sky that seems older than memory itself, the night opens like a quiet sanctuary. Constellations hover above the land, not glittering for beauty, but arranged with deliberate care, as if someone long ago placed them there and never returned to move them again. They resemble maps whose meanings have been lost, routes that once guided hands and lives, now followed only by silence. The earth below is cool and breathing. Dust settles. Stones remember weight. A lone farmer lies flat against the field, his back pressed into soil that has known centuries of footsteps and seasons. His eyes are open, steady, tracing the slow geometry above him. He is not counting stars for wonder. He is counting them because his survival depends on it. Each light carries instruction. Each distance between them holds a warning. When one cluster tilts toward the horizon, it is time to prepare the ground. When another sinks too low, the seeds must wait. The sky does not speak these rules aloud. It never explains itself, and yet the field listens. It is said that before numbers and calendars, before names were given to months and winds, the heavens were the first teachers. The soil learned from the stars, and those who worked the land learned to look upward before they looked down. Farming was never only about rain or muscle or time, it was about alignment. Beneath the silence, breath rises and falls. The farmer knows the night well. He knows the way the moon's changing face presses gently on growth and rest. He knows how certain stars arrive like old messengers, returning at the same moment each year, patient and exact. He knows that the sky keeps its promises, though it never explains why it keeps them. The world stretches upward from the field, from dust into darkness, from labor into cosmic order. The farmer's hands are stained with earth, yet his understanding reaches beyond it. He cannot touch the stars, he cannot name their true nature, but he can read their movements as one reads the turning of a familiar road. Whispers tell us that long ago patterns were noticed and remembered, not written, not carved, but held in breath and repetition. A certain light rising before dawn meant the soil would soon wake. Another appearing after sunset warned up the ground must be left to sleep. Knowledge passed from watching to doing, from doing to remembering. Symbols formed quietly. Spirals echoed the slow turning of the sky. Circles mirrored return and renewal. Stones were set into the land not only to mark boundaries, but to reflect what moved above them. Fields became mirrors of the heavens, laid out with a care that was both practical and sacred. Marked by the moon, the land learned rhythm. Waxing light invited growth. Waning shadows asked for patience. The farmer trusted this rhythm not because it was beautiful, but because it worked. A seed placed at the wrong time did not forgive. A harvest mistimed did not return. And yet, for all their intimacy with the stars, these farmers could never reach them. The heavens guided hands in the soil, but remained forever distant, veiled, untouched. Order was offered without comfort, instruction without reassurance. The sky watched, but it never answered questions. So memory filled the spaces where certainty ended. Stories drifted into the night air. It was said that gods crossed the darkness like sailors, their paths traced in fire, that the dead returned as light, watching over the land they once worked, that the bright river of stars overhead was a passage between worlds, where souls moved from one harvest to the next. None of this could be proven. None of it needed to be. Faith grew where explanation could not. To kneel beneath an unanswering sky and place a seed into the ground was an act of trust deeper than understanding. The farmer believed not because he knew, but because the land remembered. Generations followed the same silent choreography. Knees bent, fingers opened, seeds vanished into darkness. Each movement echoed those that came before, guided by lights that had already outlived countless lives. The sky turned, the field waited. The stars promised balance, not mercy. They revealed timing, not meaning. Still, the crops rose when they were honored, and failed when they were ignored. The heavens did not care who watched them. They turned regardless. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the night begins to thin. A pale blue breathes along the horizon. the sharp points of light soften. One by one the constellations withdraw, slipping back into invisibility without farewell. They have given what they give, nothing more. The farmer rises. His body carries the ache of listening too long, of holding knowledge that must be acted upon before it fades. His eyes still hold the ghost of patterns that will soon be gone. The field lies before him, unchanged, patient, waiting for the next gesture. Soon the sun will claim the land. The stars will vanish into daylight, just as countless hands before his have vanished beneath the same turning sky. Names will be lost, stories will thin, but the rhythm will remain. Perhaps it was never meant to be known who first read the sky. Perhaps the knowledge was always meant to outlive the knower. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As dawn settles fully over the fields, the silence asks its final question. If the stars shaped every harvest, who remembers the hands that followed their guidance, now resting unseen beneath the same turning sky? No answer arrives. Only the land remains, only the light, only the slow, unbroken turning of time. It is said that the first memory of the land is not sound, but touch. Bare feet sink slowly into wet soil, toes pressing into cool resistance, finding balance where water and earth meet. The mud yields, then holds. Hands descend after them, fingers coated in dark silt that smells of rain, river, and time itself. There is nothing dramatic in this moment, no witness, no declaration, only weight, breath, and the quiet agreement between body and ground. Beneath the silence, the land feels almost alive. It pulses faintly, not with movement, but with patience. Each press of the heel, each shift of balance, leaves an impression that will soon be erased. The farmer does not resist this vanishing, he works within it. Whispers tell us that long before stone monuments rose or names were carved into memory, there was this intimacy. Skin against soil, muscle learning the language of resistance. Farming was not an act of conquest, it was an ongoing negotiation, performed slowly, day after day, without audience. The body bends, it always bends, again and again, in rhythms so old they no longer feel learned. Seeds are pressed gently into mud that clings and releases like breath. The motion is unremarkable, yet exact. Too shallow, and the birds will remember. Too deep, and the seed will forget itself. The hands know this without explanation. Tools lie nearby, simple and worn. Reed baskets woven tightly enough to hold grain, loosely enough to breathe. Wooden plows smoothed by years of palms and rain. Stone weights darkened by river water, shaped not by design, but by patience. Nothing gleams, nothing announces itself as important. These objects do not belong to history, they belong to repetition. Where memory fades, motion remains. Each day unfolds like the one before, lifting, carrying, pressing, waiting. The labor does not strive for greatness, it strives for continuity. The land is worked not to be mastered, but to be persuaded. The farmer listens with his body. The soil responds in seasons, not words. Marked by the moon, the work changes subtly. Nights of fullness leave the ground swollen and heavy. Waning light dries the surface, asks for restraint. The farmer's muscles adjust, his breath slows or quickens. He does not record these changes, he absorbs them. It is said that prayer once looked like this, not spoken upward, but pressed downward, each movement an offering, each ache a quiet devotion. The repetition itself became sacred, not because it was noticed, but because it endured. Beneath crumbled temples and rising cities, these motions continued. Kings were fed by hands they never saw. Altars rose on grain grown by bodies that would never enter them. The contradiction lay heavy in the air, lives that sustained everything, yet appeared nowhere. The farmers' names dissolved quickly. They were not written, they were not sung. They were carried briefly in breath, then released. Their exhaustion lingered longer than their identities. Sweat soaked into soil already rich with memory. And still the work was done. The land demanded it. The river promised renewal. The seasons returned whether anyone watched them or not. The farmers did not expect recognition. Expectation was a luxury for those whose labor could pause. Their offerings were physical, shoulders stiff with effort, hands cracked and darkened, backs curved toward the earth, slowly taking its shape. The body itself became a vessel of continuity, carrying gestures older than language. Symbols gathered quietly around them. Reeds whispered in the wind. Water reflected the sky without comment. Mud dried, cracked, returned to softness. Everything participated, nothing applauded. It is said that temples held silence, but the fields held something deeper. A silence filled with movement, a stillness earned through repetition. Each harvest carried not only grain, but the unseen weight of hours, days, lives folded into it. As dusk approaches, the work loosens its grip. The light softens. Shadows lengthen across the fields, tracing patterns that will vanish by morning. The farmer steps toward the river, mud flaking from skin with each movement. Hands enter the water slowly. Cold washes over warmth. Silt clouds briefly, then drifts away. The river does not remember the shape of the hands. It accepts, then moves on. Mud returns to water. Effort dissolves into current. Breath slows. The day releases its hold. Across the fields, tools rest where they were left, unceremonious and faithful. Reeds sway gently, their reflections trembling on the surface of the river. Where memory fades, the earth remains. Perhaps it was never meant for these lives to leave monuments. Perhaps their legacy was always meant to be quieter, carried in grain, in soil, in the unbroken rhythm of nourishment. The land does not speak their names, yet it responds to their touch. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Night settles without announcement. The river darkens. The fields return to shadow. Somewhere beneath the surface, seeds wait, held in the same patience that shaped the hands which placed them there. And the silence asks its final question, softly, without demand. When labor leaves no stone behind it, does the earth remember the ones who fed it? No answer arrives, only water flowing, only soil breathing, only the slow, faithful continuity of life, carried forward by hands now gone, yet never truly absent. It is said that there is a kind of silence that only grain can keep. Inside the granary, the air is dim and cool, held apart from the sun by thick walls of earth and stone. Slanted light enters through a narrow opening high above, cutting the darkness like a quiet blade. In that beam, dust drifts slowly, falling and rising again, like a snowfall that has forgotten the ground. Each particle turns once, twice, then settles back into stillness. The scent is dry and faintly sweet, old wood, clay, time. Rows of jars line the space, their rounded bodies pressed close together, sealed and patient. They do not speak, yet they seem to listen. Beneath the silence, something waits. This is not merely a room, it is a held breath. Whispers tell us that long ago the granary was considered a threshold, not between worlds, but between moments. What lay inside had already survived the field, the flood, the heat, the insects, the hands that cut and carried, yet it had not yet reached the mouth, had not yet become strength or warmth or life. It lingered here, suspended between abundance and absence. Grain was never only food, it was time made tangible, it was the future folded into jars. Farmers entered these spaces softly, not out of fear, but respect. The harvest had been generous, yes, but generosity could still vanish. A season's worth of labor rested behind sealed lids and packed earth. Each jar held not only seed and sustenance, but prayer, gratitude pressed down beside anxiety, hope layered carefully atop caution. Marked by the moon, the granary filled and emptied according to rhythms older than walls. Nights of fullness followed harvests, long waning months followed, when the doors remained closed and trust was required. The farmer learned that faith did not end when the field was cleared, it deepened. It is said that gods watched these chambers closely, not as protectors alone, but as judges. Balance mattered, fair measure mattered. A jar filled dishonestly could sour. Grain hoarded beyond need could invite rot. What was stored carried moral weight. So rituals grew quietly around the granary. Seals were set with care. Symbols were pressed into clay. Small offerings of breath, oil, ash, or silence were given before the doors were closed. The gods did not speak in response. They observed. Beneath the silence, unease lived alongside reverence. Grain could betray its keepers. Moisture crept unseen. Insects found their way through the smallest mercy in a wall. Fire remembered every granary it had ever taken, and beyond nature there were other hungers. Authority, too, knew the value of these rooms. Kings measured power in stored grain. Temples counted favor in full jars. What fed the people could also control them. A granary stood between survival and loss, abundance and obedience. The farmer felt this tension most sharply not during labor, but during waiting. The fields demanded action. The granary demanded restraint. Days passed without opening the doors. Weeks lengthened. The silence inside was listened to as carefully as the weather outside. At night, wind moved across the walls. Rodents scratched faintly. The farmer lay awake, imagining sounds that were not there, fearing those that were. He trusted the gods, yet he checked the seals. Faith and vigilance shared the same space. Where memory fades, waiting remains. Scrolls and tallies came later. Before them, the body counted. The weight of jars, the rhythm of meals, the slow, deliberate thinning of stores as seasons turned. Each scoop removed from a jar carried consequence. Each delay in opening one carried risk. And yet, when the seals finally broke, there was ceremony in it. Not celebration, but acknowledgement. The lid lifted carefully, the scent released slowly. Hands reached in, feeling for warmth, dryness, life. Grain flowed between fingers like pale sand, whispering softly as it fell. It sounded like time itself moving. In that moment, the question always returned. Was it the precision of human effort that preserved this harvest, the careful drying, the sealing, the vigilance? Or was it divine mercy that kept rot away, that guided mice elsewhere, that quieted fire and flood? Perhaps it was never meant to be known. The gods, if they watched, did not clarify. The grain did not explain itself. It simply endured, or it did not. As months passed, the jars grew lighter. The granary emptied slowly, honestly. Hunger was held at bay not by certainty, but by balance. When the final jar was opened, when the last measure was poured, there was no triumph, only relief, thin and quiet. Dust still drifted in the slanted light. Empty jars remained, their hollows echoing softly. The space that once held abundance now held memory. Soon it would wait again. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Outside, the fields prepared themselves anew. Inside, the granary rested, neither full nor empty, but faithful. The question lingered, unresolved, as it always had. When hunger stayed away, who deserved thanks? The hands that worked, or the unseen gaze that watched? No answer arrived. Only grain pouring like sand, only jars cooling in shadow, only silence holding the shape of sustenance as sleep draws near. It is said that the first shelter was not built, but shaped. At sunset, a small mud brick home rests quietly at the edge of the fields. Its walls glow faintly, holding the last warmth of the day, as if the earth itself were breathing out light before night arrives. The structure is simple, low, rounded, imperfect. Its surface bears fingerprints of hands long gone, impressions pressed gently into wet clay and left to harden beneath an open sky. Beneath the silence, the house listens. It stands where soil was once lifted, mixed with water, straw, and patience. The same earth that fed the grain was persuaded to rise into walls. Nothing was brought from far away. Nothing was meant to endure beyond its season. The home belongs entirely to its place. Whispers tell us that these dwellings were never separate from the land. They inhaled dust in summer, exhaled dampness in winter. Cracks appeared with the heat, softened again with rain. Roofs sagged under their own weight, then were lifted, patched and smoothed by familiar hands. Repair was not failure, it was rhythm. Inside, the air was cooler. Light entered carefully, through narrow openings shaped to keep the sun from lingering too long. Shadows moved slowly along the walls, marking time more gently than any instrument. The floor was packed earth, swept smooth each morning, bearing the quiet memory of feet, sleep, and stillness. Marked by the moon, the house changed. Nights of fullness brightened the interior without flame. Waning light deepened the shadows, invited rest. The home breathed with the seasons, tightening in cold, loosening in heat, never resisting the world outside it. These spaces held what history rarely names: laughter that never traveled far, stories told low, repeated until they softened into ritual, breath shared in sleep, the weight of exhaustion laid down at dusk and gathered again at dawn. The home did not preserve these moments, it simply held them while they existed. Beneath the silence, walls absorbed everything. Scrolls were not stored here, names were not carved. No stone foundation announced permanence. These homes were shaped for presence, not remembrance. They stood because they were needed, not because they were meant to last. And yet, they were sacred. The fire pit at the center glowed like a small sun, its smoke finding its way through gaps in the roof. Ash gathered slowly, mixed with soil, returned to the floor. Meals were prepared with movements as old as the fields. Each gesture echoed countless others, performed without awareness of their age. Where memory fades, habit remains. The farmer's life moved between field and home without boundary. Mud followed feet inside, straw clung to walls, tools leaned against corners, resting where the day ended. The home did not separate labor from rest, it received both without judgment. Outside, temples rose in stone, their edges sharp, their shadows deliberate. They were built to defy time, to declare favor, to demand memory. Inside these homes, no such ambition lived. Their humility mirrored the lives within, essential, sustaining, and unrecorded. This was the contradiction the earth held quietly. The structures that fed civilizations were meant to vanish. The spaces that carried life left almost no trace. Rain softened the walls, wind worried at the roof, insects nested briefly, then moved on. When a home became too thin to protect, it was not mourned. Another was shaped nearby, using the same earth, the same gestures, the same understanding that shelter was temporary by design. It is said that nothing here was wasted. When a wall collapsed, it returned to soil. When a roof caved, its straw fed the ground. The home dissolved slowly, generously, giving itself back to the fields it once overlooked. Beneath the silence, impermanence felt natural. Generations slept beneath ceilings that breathed. Children traced cracks with their fingers, learning the shapes of change. Elders leaned against walls that had leaned before. The home aged alongside its inhabitants, never outpacing them, never pretending to outlive them. And when it was abandoned, it did not resist. An empty house waits quietly now, its doorway open to wind and dust. Light enters freely, no longer filtered by intention. The floor has softened, the walls bow outward, releasing their shape. Silence fills the space where voices once layered gently over one another. Where memory fades, the earth remembers differently. Dust gathers in corners where warmth once lingered. Insects move through without pause. Rain leaves faint lines down the walls, rewriting them slowly. The home exhales its final breath, becoming ground again, indistinguishable from the land that shaped it. Perhaps it was never meant to endure. Perhaps sacredness was always meant to be temporary, carried in use rather than monument. Some spaces are holy not because they remain, but because they once held life. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As night settles fully, the outline of the house blurs into shadow. Stars rise overhead, indifferent and ancient. The earth cools. The home rests, neither standing nor gone, but returning. Nothing is lost, only transformed, only folded back into the breath of earth, where sleep and memory quietly meet. It is said that the longest measure of time is not marked by the sun or the moon, but by stillness. A farmer stands at the edge of the field, unmoving. The earth beneath his feet is quiet, neither dry nor wet enough to speak its intention. The horizon lies open before him, a thin line where sky and soil meet without agreement. No tool is raised, no seed is pressed, nothing begins. This too is labor. Beneath the silence, breath slows. The farmer's eyes do not search for certainty, only for signs. A faint change in color along the distant sky, a shift in the wind's patience, a remembered shape of clouds that once came before rain. Time does not advance here, it gathers. Whispers tell us that before calendars were etched into stone or inked onto scrolls, time lived in the body as anticipation. Days were not counted, they were endured. The year unfolded as a cycle of waiting, each phase heavier than the last. Waiting for the flood, waiting for the first green blade to break the surface, waiting for grain to harden, waiting for rest. Waiting was the longest season of all. Marked by the moon, the farmer learned to hold himself still. Action taken too early could invite loss. Action taken too late could invite nothing at all. The gods, it was believed, moved slowly, deliberately, like the seasons themselves. They did not hurry for human hunger. So patience became devotion. The agricultural calendar was never a neat circle. It was a spiral, tightening and loosening, pulling the farmer forward and then asking him to remain where he was. Hope arrived quietly, without warning. Fear lingered longer than expected. Relief came briefly, like shade, before departing again. Beneath the silence, the land taught restraint. Signs were read not as commands, but as suggestions. A bird's absence, a river that hesitated at its banks, soil that crumbled too easily in the hand. None of these spoke clearly. All of them demanded interpretation. Time stretched in these moments, thinning like breath held too long. The farmer waited not because he lacked strength, but because strength without timing was useless. The body learned endurance not through motion, but through pause. Where memory fades, waiting remains. Stories grew around this stillness. It was said that the gods tested devotion not through hardship alone, but through delay. That blessings ripened slowly, unseen, while humans measured their own impatience against the sky's indifference. Anxiety became prayer, Each morning began with the same glance toward the horizon. Each evening ended with the same unanswered question. Had the moment passed, or had it not yet arrived? The field offered no reassurance. It reflected only what it was given. Scrolls were eventually filled with symbols and cycles, but even then certainty did not follow. A calendar could suggest, but it could not promise. The farmer knew this. He trusted patterns, not guarantees. Between planting and harvest lay vast, unnamed spaces of time, days when nothing happened, weeks when everything felt suspended. These were the true measures of the year, though no mark recorded them. Beneath the silence, the future gathered itself slowly. As dusk approaches, the light softens without conclusion. The field remains undecided. The farmer exhales, still waiting. Nothing has been resolved. Nothing has failed. Perhaps it was never meant to be decided in a single moment. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Night settles gently. Stars rise, indifferent to urgency. The calendar turns without moving. Breath is held, not in fear, but in reverence, honoring the sacred stillness where futures quietly form. It is said that the land remembers those who touch it first with wonder. At the edge of the field, where the soil softens and grasses grow thin, a child crouches low. Small fingers trace lines into the earth, spirals and paths that lead nowhere, then everywhere. Dust gathers beneath the nails. The ground yields easily, accepting these marks without question. Above, the sky is wide and untroubled, holding its breath as if not to interrupt. Beneath the silence, something ancient begins again. The child does not know the weight of seasons yet. There is no sense of before or after, only now. The soil is cool in the morning, warm by midday. A beetle passes. A clod crumbles. Play unfolds without intention, yet every motion mirrors something older than memory. Whispers tell us that this is how inheritance begins, not with words, not with instruction, but with presence. The field becomes the first teacher. Its lessons are quiet, repeated daily, written not on scrolls, but into muscle and habit. The child watches more than listens, how a hand presses seed into earth, how feet move carefully between rows, how breath slows when the sky darkens unexpectedly. Nothing is explained, nothing needs to be. Learning arrives like dust on skin, unnoticed until it cannot be washed away. Marked by the moon, the child's days lengthen and contract. There are moments of laughter among the furrows, games played with stones and straw. Joy rises easily here, braided tightly with labor. The field does not separate the two, neither does the child. Seasons pass without ceremony. The child grows taller. The lines traced in soil become straighter, more deliberate. Small tasks appear naturally, as if they had always been waiting. Carry this. Hold that. Watch closely. The boundary between play and work thins, then disappears. Where memory fades, motion remains. There is innocence here, but it is not sheltered. The sun burns. The body tires. Hands learn roughness early. Exhaustion arrives quietly, not as punishment, but as fact. Still, there is belonging. The land is not foreign. It is known intimately, like a second skin. The child understands the field before understanding words for it, knows which patches dry first, which corners flood, where insects gather. Knowledge settles deeply, not as information, but as orientation. This is where I stand. This is where I return. Beneath the silence, identity takes shape. It is said that cities teach ambition, but fields teach continuity. Here, life does not promise escape, it offers place. The same gestures performed by parents and grandparents repeat without announcement, bending, lifting, waiting. The child does not question this inheritance. It arrives as naturally as breath. And yet, the contradiction grows alongside the body. Play fades gradually. The games become chores. The pauses shorten. Rest is earned, not given. Childhood stretches thin, woven tightly with responsibility. The field does not notice the difference. It accepts all hands equally. Still, there is comfort in knowing what is expected, in belonging to a rhythm older than choice. The child feels rooted, even as effort deepens. The land gives no illusion of ease, but it offers certainty of purpose. Stars rise over familiar ground. The same constellations watched by earlier generations hover unchanged. The child looks up, then back down, learning where attention must remain. Dreams are shaped quietly here, kept low, close to earth. Where memory fades, the cycle continues. Years pass, unnoticed as dust drifting through light. The child's hands grow steady. The movements practiced in play now sustain life. The field recognizes the change without comment. It has seen this before. One evening, at the edge of the same field, the grown child pauses. The soil feels familiar beneath the feet. The horizon has not moved. Hands repeat motions learned long ago, motions never formally taught. The continuity is complete. The silence asks its question gently. Was this inheritance a blessing, grounding and sure, or a quiet cage shaped so early it felt like home? Perhaps it was never meant to be answered. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Night settles. The field rests. Dust clings softly to skin. Above, the stars keep their distance. Below, the earth holds its children, generation after generation, without judgment, without end. It is said that the smallest gestures are sometimes the ones most carefully watched. At the edge of the field, where the furrows loosen and the soil gives way to wild grass, a small bundle rests upon the earth, bread wrapped in cloth, a handful of flowers gathered without symmetry, a whisper released and immediately taken by the air. Nothing marks this place as sacred except the pause that lingers around it. Beneath the silence, the offering waits. There is no altar here, no stone raised toward the sky, no priest, no witness, no sound of bells or chant, only ground that has been worked all day, now cooling beneath the last light. The soil is dark and soft, carrying the memory of seeds and footsteps. The bundle touches it lightly, as if unsure whether it belongs. Whispers tell us that faith did not always live in temples. It wandered instead, settling where people paused long enough to speak without being heard. In fields like this, devotion took a quieter form. It was not announced, it was placed gently and left alone. The farmer stepped away without ceremony. There was no expectation of response. The act itself was the message. Bread was not offered because it was excess, it was offered because it was precious. Flowers were not chosen for beauty alone, but for their nearness, growing where hands already passed each day. These were not sacrifices meant to impress, they were conversations, spoken softly, as one speaks to someone believed to be nearby. Marked by the moon, such offerings appeared and vanished without record. At dawn they might be gone, eaten by birds, scattered by wind, returned to soil. At dusk they waited, untouched, holding the weight of intention longer than the body could. The gods, it was believed, did not dwell only in distant sanctuaries. They walked the land. They moved through stalks and shadows. They paused where gratitude was sincere, even if clumsily expressed. A field was as worthy of their attention as any carved hall. Beneath the silence, faith learned to be private. These rituals were not taught formally, they were felt. A pause at the edge of work, a moment when breath slowed and hands released what they carried. No words were required, yet words were often given anyway. Hopes for rain, for protection, for balance. Requests folded gently into the offering, not demanded, merely placed. Scrolls did not record these acts. No calendar marked their timing. They happened when need rose high enough, when fear or gratitude pressed too close to be carried alone. The land became a confidant. Where memory fades, gesture remains. Yet uncertainty lived here as well. The offering lay exposed, vulnerable to weather and creatures. If it vanished by morning, was it accepted? If it remained, was it ignored? The gods did not clarify. They offered no signs that could not also be explained by chance. This ambiguity did not weaken devotion, it shaped it. Faith practiced without confirmation asked something different of the believer. Not proof, but sincerity. Not reward, but release. The farmer did not know if the gods listened. He knew only that speaking felt necessary. Beneath the silence, doubt and trust coexisted. Some offerings were given in joy, after a harvest safely gathered. Others came from fear, placed quietly after storms passed too close or skies withheld rain too long. The soil received them all without distinction. It did not promise intercession, it did not refuse. As the light thinned, the field changed its voice. Insects began their soft chorus. Wind moved gently through stalks, bending them just enough to whisper. The bundle remained where it was left, untouched, unclaimed. Night approached without urgency. Stars emerged slowly, marking the sky with patterns older than the questions asked below. The offering sat beneath them, small and fragile, carrying a hope that would never be answered directly. The gods, if they passed by, left no trace of their presence. Perhaps it was never meant to be known whether they listened. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. As darkness settled fully, the field closed its eyes. The soil cooled. The offering became just another shape in shadow, indistinguishable from stone or clod. Silence did not feel empty here. It felt open. Nothing was resolved. Nothing was taken. Nothing was promised. Only the act itself remained, a moment of devotion given freely, then released back into the night, where unanswered prayers have always learned to rest. Beneath the soft golden light of an ancient sun, there is a sound, the sound of a quiet ritual. It is the sound of grain spilling from hand to hand, each seed a small offering, a delicate exchange between life and need. The hands that move it are weathered, worn from seasons spent under the sun's unrelenting gaze. The eyes that watch are unblinking, a silent judgment of weight and worth. There is no room for error in this moment. Each kernel, like a life, is measured, accounted for. It is a sacred duty, a burden wrapped in silence. The air smells of earth and dust, the scent of a harvest so ancient it seems part of the very soil itself. And the hands that press the grain between fingers, that feel its weight, understand that this act is not merely one of measurement, but of history. History that binds them, the farmers, to a far-off world, a world that is as distant as it is unyielding. The weight of this grain is not felt by those who will never touch it, yet it is felt deeply by those whose lives it sustains. The baskets, heavy with their quiet burdens, stand as silent markers of a system much larger than the hands that carry them. In this place, in this time, this simple act is everything. It is both the thread that connects and the wall that divides. And so the grain is measured, slowly, carefully, without protest, because the world demands it. It is said that the land was once full of promise, fields lush and fertile, flowing rivers nourishing the soil, and cities rising like great stone giants from the earth. But all that has faded. The cities are crumbled, their walls fallen into ruin, their halls empty, echoing with memories of forgotten grandeur. What remains now is only this, the quiet hum of necessity, the ritual of giving that sustains the empire, its vastness stretching beyond the horizon, beyond sight, beyond understanding. Whispers tell us that long ago, before the land grew dry and the temples fell to dust, there were kings and queens who commanded tribute, not from greed, but from an understanding that to maintain the greatness of their kingdom, sacrifice was required. The farmers' hands, rough from the endless toil of the earth, were the first to feel this burden. The tax was not a mere levy, it was a covenant. In exchange for sustenance, the kingdom would be sustained. A silent, unspoken agreement woven through the very fabric of time. Beneath the silence, beneath the quiet measure of grain, a contradiction blooms, for it is those who feed the kingdom, those whose sweat waters the crops, who find their own lives at the mercy of forces they can neither name nor escape. There is no security in their world. The fields may yield plentiful harvests one year and fail miserably the next. The river may flood or dry up. The winds may shift. But the tax, that measure of grain, remains constant, unchanging, unyielding. The farmers know that resistance is not an option. They know that the forces that demand their portion are as vast as the sky and as distant as the stars. These forces are not seen, but they are felt. They are not tangible, but they are real. The farmer knows the weight of this truth in his bones, knows no cry for mercy will change the unyielding march of time, and so they give, quietly, without protest. The grain is measured, the baskets filled, and the portions sent off to places they will never see, to people they will never meet. The city to the north, where the rulers reside, where the temples rise in cold stone, is a world far removed from this one. The kingdom's grandeur is built upon the quiet compliance of those who never see the fruits of their labor. The grain they offer, the portion they surrender, sustains the splendor of the rulers, the priests, the warriors who protect the empire. But what of the farmer? What of those who give, who toil, whose very lives are marked by the silence of their offering? The answer, perhaps, is lost in the silence itself. It is said that the rulers of the kingdom rarely, if ever, remember the names of those who feed them. The farmer's toil is invisible, buried beneath the weight of time and distance. The grain they give may feed the bellies of kings, but it never fills the hearts of those who give it. And yet they give, as though it is the only way they know to survive. The silence of their offering is both a curse and a blessing, a quiet act that binds them to a world they cannot see, to a fate they cannot escape. As the sun sets, casting its golden light over the silent fields, the question lingers in the air, unsaid, never fully formed. How long can this last? The balance, the quiet exchange between the land and the kingdom, between the farmer and the empire, is fragile, held together by the thinnest of threads. And as the night falls, the fields become still. The grain is harvested, the baskets emptied, and the land returns to its silence. But even in the silence, the ruins whisper. The wind stirs the dust of forgotten temples, and the broken stones of abandoned cities tell stories of a time when the weight of grain was not a symbol of submission, but a sacred offering. What happened to the people who built these great monuments? What happened to the rulers who once commanded so much? Perhaps they were lost to the very weight they placed upon their people. Perhaps they were undone by the silence they demanded. For when the cries of the people fade into quiet compliance, when the burdens become too heavy to bear, even the grandest of kingdoms may fall. The weight of tax, of the grain measured and surrendered, may one day be the very thing that tips the scale. As the night deepens, as the stars appear in their endless procession, the question lingers unsaid, never fully formed. What is the cost of silence? The fields lie empty, the baskets discarded, the grain is gone, the portion taken, but the land remains. And in the stillness there is something profound, something unspoken. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the answer lies not in the measure of grain, but in the silence that follows. The silence that fills the space between the farmer's hands and the distant rulers, between the fields and the temples, between the land and the heavens. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and so in the stillness of the night we listen, not for the answers, but for the questions that have no words. The land waits, as it always has, in quiet surrender, and we too wait in the space between the measure of grain and the silence that follows. In this silence there is both peace and uncertainty, For the world that is sustained by the quiet offering of its people is a world that is forever poised between balance and collapse. And as the night deepens, we are left with nothing but the weight of what has been given and the silence that remains. Beneath the pale embrace of a gentle moon, the fields lie still, their once vibrant grains now harvested, leaving only the soft whispers of earth where life once stirred. The land, heavy with its own silence, exudes a profound sense of rest, rare, brief, and deeply earned. There is no rush now, no hurry to reclaim what has been taken. The tools of labor, once gripped with purpose, now rest on the ground, idle in the coolness of the night. The rhythmic pulse of life, so tirelessly maintained, has softened into stillness, and in this pause there is something sacred, something ancient in its simplicity. It is said that in moments like these, when the weight of the day has settled into memory and the horizon seems to fade into nothingness, time itself takes a breath. The land exhales in quiet reverence for the work it has borne. This brief lull, this precious pause between cycles, is a moment when the world seems to hold its breath. The tools of labor, wooden sickles, iron plows, are now but relics of a completed task. The land, now bare, is like a deep, quiet sigh after years of toil, waiting patiently for the return of the rains, the sprouting of new life. The air is crisp, filled with the stillness that only a land in rest can know. The stars, in their ancient dance, pulse softly overhead. Their light is pale, diffused by the mist that rises from the earth, as though the soil itself is sharing in the stillness. The earth waits. The moon, draped in its serene grace, watches over the fields with a calm that speaks of eternity, of the cycles that have come before and will come again. Yet as the hours pass and the night deepens, the silence grows thicker, pregnant with the weight of time. A deeper reflection begins to stir, for beneath the peace of this moment there lies something much older, a realization that the fields themselves hold more than just the bounty of the harvest. They are a mirror to those who work them, a reflection of mortality, of time's steady passage. Whispers tell us that the farmers, whose hands have tilled the soil for so many years, have begun to feel the weight of their own seasons passing. Their bodies, like the land, have aged in harmony with the fields, each wrinkle etched into skin like the marks on the earth, each movement a little slower, a little more deliberate. The earth, too, has its seasons. The farmer's breath, steady as the turning of the soil, is growing slower, like the rhythm of the world as it inhales and exhales with the passage of time. And in this moment of quiet, the land itself feels like a mirror to their lives, the once tended earth now resting, and so too must they. There is a peace in this contemplation, for in rest there is a kind of knowing, a knowing that all things, like the fields, are meant to rest. The farmers, who once worked the land with unrelenting purpose, now find themselves caught in a sacred pause. Their tools are no longer in their hands, their bodies no longer strained under the sun's harsh glare. Instead, they settle into stillness, into the gentle peace that comes after a long season of labor. In this silence, they understand that the rhythm of the earth is mirrored in their own hearts, beating in time with the land. They are not separate, but one, a quiet, ever-turning wheel of life and death. As the night deepens, the stars above appear brighter, clearer, as if the silence has allowed them to shine more brightly. The constellations, ancient and unchanging, mark the heavens with their eternal presence, a reminder that all things are part of something larger, something boundless. The heavens are the same for the farmer as they are for the land, the same as they were for those who toiled before, and so too will they be for those who will come after. The pause becomes a reflection of what is both eternal and fleeting, the interweaving of breath and soil, life and death, toil and rest. The earth waits for its next breath, the return of the rains, the birth of new crops, the turning of the wheel once more. But for now, in the silence of the night, it is enough simply to be. The earth knows this, the farmer knows this, and in that knowing there is peace. But even as peace settles over the land, there is an unspoken truth, one that cannot be ignored. As the land rests, so too does the farmer. The fields that stretch endlessly beneath the pale moonlight are a reflection of lives spent in rhythm with soil, water, and breath. These lives, these hands that have nurtured the earth, will one day too, like the land, fall still. It is not a sorrowful thought, but one that comes with the understanding of time's gentle but unyielding flow. Just as the seasons come and go, so too do lives. The farmer's breath, the pulse of life in their veins, will one day come to its final exhale. The fields, now bare, will be fertile again, but those who tended them will be folded gently into the long sleep of history. As the night settles deeper still, the land's silence grows richer, more profound. The coolness of the air wraps around the weary bones of the earth, and the stars seem to hold their breath with the world. The quiet is not filled with sorrow, but with reverence. The earth, in its endless cycle of birth and death, knows that rest is not an ending, but a necessary part of the journey. The earth waits, and in that waiting it honors the lives spent in its service. Perhaps it is in this waiting, this quiet pause between cycles, that the most sacred truth of all is found. It is not in the planting or the harvesting, but in the rest. The stillness, the space between action is where the soul of the earth resides, and as the land rests, the silence becomes sacred, drenched in mystery and reverence for all that has been and all that is yet to come. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and the earth speaks in its silence. It whispers the ancient truth that all things, like the seasons, like the cycles of life, are meant to rest. And so, in the quiet of the night, the fields are at peace, waiting for the next breath to stir the soil, for the next season to begin. But for now, they rest. And so, the land waits, and we too wait with it, in reverence, in silence. And so, the farmers of ancient Egypt continued their relentless labor, quietly shaping the future of one of the greatest civilizations in history, all while living lives that were simple, exhausting, and often forgotten by time. As the night falls over us, remember that history, no matter how boring it may seem, is full of hidden stories waiting to be told, and sometimes those stories are the perfect lullabies. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. I hope you found a sense of peace and understanding in the life of these ancient farmers. Until next time, let the gentle whispers of history guide you into a deep, restful sleep. Sweet dreams and good night.